something different is happening here.
The shoes defied everything.
It gave a voice to the voiceless.
Who the hell does he think he is?
Unbanned, The Legend of AJ1. I like to explain it as really a biography on the Air Jordan 1.
Unbanned is a documentary about Michael Jordan's first pair of shoes in a time where expressing yourself wasn't as popular as it is today.
Michael wore them in some exhibition games and the NBA banned it. They literally kicked it out of the game. How those events went down, which model of shoe it was, that's where the controversy lies. Is this person telling the truth or is that person telling the truth? It is a mythology. The early stage of the edit, for sure, was a big exploration. I started with an outline, and it was important to me to really structure it in a proper 3-act structure.
We started with 10 interviews, and we just started crafting with the 10 that we had, knowing that more would come, but what can we build with these 10?
I think there were about 60 interviews we shot, and actually a surprisingly high number of those made it in. Could have been about 180 hours of interview footage. The most overwhelming part of our project was the archival footage. By the end, we had over 20,000 assets in the project. Team projects allowed the assistant editors to do a lot of prep work.
The way I edit is conducive to using Adobe Premiere. We needed to be able to bring in footage super fast. If I have an idea and I kind of want to really play with it, Charles, can you get me 6 music videos from 1984 hip hop? And I could be doing something else, and all of a sudden they're just coming at me, and now I have them to work with.
We were in constant communication all day. He could just spin around in his chair, and I was right there.
Because of the cloud-based system of Adobe, and you wouldn't be able to do that process 5 or 6 years ago at all.
With Premiere, it's not always about finessing the edit. I wanted to be able to throw things in the timeline, try something out real quick, and we can explore an idea like, this is gonna work. It wasn't about sliding or overwriting or moving. The way I can move in Premiere is the way that I would see things playing out on my head. When we started, it was interviews and whatever I could grab on YouTube, and then we started bringing in different artists to start incorporating graphics.
The documentary is very live action heavy, like you see a lot of people being interviewed, and he wanted to bring way more visual language to graphics and explaining the history of the Air Jordan 1 by using graphics, illustrations. So Alex and I were very close because we both work in the Adobe suite and we always have to collaborate.
I've probably been collecting sneakers since I was like 15 or 16. It was something that was a passion of mine, especially the Jordan 1. It's big time. Basically at one point we were kind of at a crossroads of trying to find out what more can we pull out from the shoe, because up until this point we were just using web imagery. We actually bought a Jordan 1 off of eBay, and then we took it apart and I scanned them in individually into different pieces, and we just started using it on different parts of the marketing assets, whether it be the sole of the shoe or it be the toe box, or one of my personal favorites, the tongue.
I hope that what the audience takes away from the documentary is what the shoe really stands for.
The thing that kind of amazed me was how this massive part of our culture now started fairly humbly. It was almost an accident.
Everything that goes into this shoe is so much more than the leather, the lace, the stitching. There's a spirit that is somewhere embedded in here, and you feel that when you put them on your feet.
Hi, I'm Margot Nack. Thanks for joining me. I'm Pro Video Strategic Manager here at Adobe, and we're in the Santa Monica office, and we are talking with Dexton Deboree, the director and writer of Unbanned, and Alex Trudeau Viriato, who is the editor and writer of Unbanned. So thanks for joining us. We're really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And congratulations, because you just won an award at Cannes Lion.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, really awesome.
To everybody.
Yeah. And if you are interested in seeing Unbanned, if you haven't already, you can stream it on iTunes, you can get it on Google Play, and you can stream it on Amazon Prime. It's really terrific. And so I'll start out just by asking you, Dex, maybe give us a little background on your relationship to the Air Jordan and the Jordan team, and why you wanted to tell this story.
So my relationship to the shoe goes way, way back to being a kid. And I was introduced to it at a skate ramp. This local kind of skate hero in my town that I looked up to showed up one day in a pair of AJ1s, duct taped and ripped to shit. And I was like, I just wanted to be like that guy. And that was my introduction. And said, I got to have a pair of those shoes because I need to step into what that guy's all about. So that was the original, and then came back around for me, many years later, and just being a sneaker fan, and then got an opportunity to work with the brand quite a number of years ago now, probably about 5 years ago. And I from the very beginning, I always had this sort of fascination of this zeitgeist that's Jordan, the shoe, the man, the brand, this community of people that really kind of worshipped this Jumpman symbol, of which I was one of them. I was always, it always kind of bugged me that I felt like there was something more to it than just, people thought it was cool or they were in love with MJ, or, whatever kind of surface level thing that people would come up with, and everybody sort of had different associations to it. And for me, all those things are like ingredients and elements to it, but I felt like there had to be something deeper. There had to be something beneath the surface that was like why people actually had this like almost like worship, and like a messiah type feeling to it. And so that's was bugging me forever. And then one day it just kind of through a series of conversations related to an ad campaign that I was working on, somebody mentioned, oh, we should frame up, the history of the one in like 10 seconds just so kids know what it was all about. And it like that line hit me, and I'm like, oh shit, it's an origin story. I got to tell that story.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it came.
Yeah, I remember when the AJ1 came out, I was in middle school, like literally every kid in my middle school would kill for that shoe. They really wanted it. Everyone was saving up their money for it. The kids who had it were just the coolest. And that, like you were saying, it was this weird thing that had never really happened before where people were just nuts about it. And it had this weird magnetism that you kind of almost couldn't explain.
Yeah.
So Alex, as editor, how did you get involved in this project?
I started working for the company and doing branded work for Jordan and Nike. And that's when our relationship started, editing with them. And then we started cutting little pieces together. And then he asked if I wanted to do the documentary, if that was something that interested me. So then at the time, we were thinking much shorter, smaller scale.
Like not feature length initially, or?
Yeah, I mean, when we started putting it together, it was just like, oh, these are some things we have. These are some stories we can tell. Let's start editing these together and let's see what we have. And so that's when we started cutting it together. But that it stemmed from, I had done work with him, for Jordan Brand and for Nike. And so I knew what the brand was about. And I had gone through the cycle of, I didn't know much about Jordans. I didn't have them as a kid. I didn't wear them. I had to cut content for them. And it was kind of a moment where I was like, all right, can I just go buy these? Because people talk about them like they don't exist anymore. Like you can't just go get them. Like, yeah, you can go to Foot Locker and you could buy a pair of Air Jordan 1s. And so that's what I did. And I was like, okay, this is what we're talking about. Like this is what we're doing. And that just kind of stemmed to that. And so when we started, it was just kind of like, we've worked together. That was number one. And number two was like, we've done certain things together that have a vibe of how I want to do this. I think you know this approach. You know where we want to take this. Let's go that way.
And you've edited lots of different documentary projects. So documentary is something that's like a language that you speak.
Yeah, and it wasn't intentional. I wasn't like, I'm going to go be an editor, I'm going to do documentaries. It actually started with my thesis in film school. I didn't have a script in my back pocket, and no one was doing something that I wanted to cut. So I was like, you know what, I work in the cycling industry. I know all these cyclists. Why don't I make a documentary about this particular type of cycling, and that'll be my thesis. And so I just jumped right in. I started interviewing people and cutting it together. And I was like, oh, this is just storytelling, but without scripts and without these things. But you still have to put the story together the very similar way, and you're still crafting these things and putting all these pieces together. And so that led to, I've done narrative, documentary, branding content, and it was just like, whatever was interesting to me is what I would go
Yeah.
and edit. It wasn't like, I'm going to do this.
Right.
That's what I have to go do.
So let's talk about the story of this film, because it is a story, and there's like a clear kind of, you set the stage and you tell the story and the evolution of the idea behind the Air Jordan 1, the release, all of the kind of the controversy, and sort of what it meant to people. So when you started thinking about telling this story, did you have like an arc in mind? And if so, how much did it change over time as you were doing interviews and collecting footage?
Yeah, so definitely had an arc in mind, and it was important, you know, to me and to all of us from the beginning that it was a proper like 3-act structure. That it was a really, you know, a story, a proper story. Because you know, once you get into it, it's a rabbit hole, and you could go off in a zillion different directions. And you know, I knew that enough, and I had never done a documentary before, so a lot of it was kind of instinct. I had written a lot of long-form scripts, and so like the story structure was something that I knew quite well, and so I started with that, and it was, you know, it was very specific in some areas of like, we definitely want to cover, you know, these things, and we think we're going to get this out of it. But certainly when we got, I mean, I wrote every single day. It was, you know, maybe more writing than, you know, any narrative script I've ever done, and I've written a lot. But it you know, it was this constant like discovery of like, we would talk to somebody either on camera or off camera, and they would give us a piece of information, and suddenly like it would change, and then it was a domino effect. And so it, you know, the journey, I think, was pretty clear from an early standpoint. The very beginning, it was one thing, and it definitely shifted at a certain point when it kind of dawned on me that it was really a biography on the shoe. As soon as that clicked for me, now you look back and it's like, it's obvious because that's the story that you're telling, but like in the beginning, it was like, I wasn't really thinking of it as like, you know, the shoe is really our hero, a 3-dimensional character, and we're really telling a biography through that lens. And that actually clicked a lot of things into place for me, because then it had sort of like, there's a formula to telling a biography. And so we applied that, and then we got into it, and it, you know, it constantly shifted and changed.
And I like the way you said, you know, it's this 3-dimensional object that is the hero of the piece. And you set it up that way from the very beginning of the film, where the animated Jordan comes spinning in, and you are like focused on this shoe, not Michael Jordan the person. It's the idea of this shoe. And I also enjoy the footage of people that you interview who are like, they're hanging on to the shoe, they're considering the shoe, they're almost talking to the shoe, because like that's where the focus is. And you did a lot of interesting like animation and graphic design as part of the documentary to help kind of explain just the shoe itself. I think you even dissected one, right?
Yeah,
and
we did.
You animated it.
Yes.
Yeah. Alex, so obviously ton of footage on Michael Jordan throughout his NBA career, the Nike commercials, right? So there's conceivably tons of footage available that you could look through. Can you touch on how you and your archival editors and researchers kind of approached that? Like, were there specific things you were looking for? Were they easy to find, hard to find? Like, how did all of that archival footage kind of come into play?
Hard. Everything was hard with that. It was just, I mean, we were learning about it. As we would get interviews, we'd actually be learning about the process of what happened, and we would be researching it ourselves. We were looking for articles, we're looking for photos, we're looking for referencing of what they're talking about. They talk about some music video, and we'd have to go try and find it. They talk about an ad, you have to go find it, and then we'd have to dig deeper to go deeper into our story and try and find these things. And you find out Nike doesn't archive every single thing that they've ever done. YouTube doesn't have everything from the 80s, and so you're just going down this dark web of like, I clicked on this, which brought me here, which brought me to this photo. I don't know where this came from. I don't know how we're going to do this, but let's try this out and let's play with it. And you just start grabbing everything you can. So my assistant, Charles Farrell, and I would just have days of just diving into the internet. What can we learn? What can we grab? Who is wearing it? Who's not wearing it? What are these people doing? Because we're learning about a culture and a time that I was not a part of.
Right.
I was born in the 80s. I wasn't wearing Jordans in the 80s. And so, you know, you're learning as you're developing this story. And to his point before of like through the shoe, and that was kind of what he would come in the office and be like, it's about the shoe. And we'd have to go through that lens. or else we'd go down this rabbit hole of how cool Michael Jordan was.
Right.
And like, oh, I can do a highlight reel of Michael Jordan. I can just do dunks and this and that, and he's jumping, he's flying, and like, I wasn't even into basketball when I was a kid, but I had a Michael Jordan poster in my room. So it didn't matter. And like, you start finding that out, and it was like, shoo, let's come back to this, or let's come back to this spirit.
Yeah.
And speaking on like when they hold it, I think the interviewees go through that process in their mind too, that it's not just, we're not talking about the physical thing. It's like the memories, how you responded to it or what you did in it. And like, those are the things that we tried to tap into and made the story about, because the physical thing is, there's a design aspect to it and there's that, but.
Yeah, but there's so much more, right? There's all the, like you said, there's this whole culture around it and what was happening in the mid 80s and what was happening in basketball and what was happening in music and hip hop.
And it helps too, because as a viewer, if they're going from beginning to end, that's kind of the journey I was going through as well. I didn't know most of who these people were, so I want to research, I want to find out who Chuck D is. I don't know much about Public Enemy, so then I went and learned all about them and what that movement meant, and you're just blown away by his knowledge and his, just how he approached that, and it's still relevant today and still speaking on things. I felt so much more, like I learned so much just from his work.
Yeah, do you feel like because you didn't grow up when, being conscious of Jordans and sort of during that middle 80s period, that was actually like a benefit to you when you were putting the story together with Dex?
Originally I was like, oh, I may not be the right person for this. I'm not a sneakerhead, and I don't have that many. Like I had a few, but I wasn't that. And then I realized that it was, from our conversation, it was just story. We just wanted to tell good stories. That was almost irrelevant. We wanted to find the human aspect of these things, and then learning it helped me go like, oh, this is going to happen. So I would need to go and do extra work, because I'm not going to tell something that I don't know myself, and I'm not going to pretend that this is truth because I heard it from one person. We need to go find it from someone else. We need to dig deeper and find evidence that backs up what this person is saying, because then you have an ethical battle of like, he said it, but can I find this, or can we do this? Is this true? And I think that makes you dive a little bit deeper, because I wasn't just trusting my instinct of like, oh yeah, I remember that. Let's go ahead and put that in the edit, and that must be it.
So you were spending a ton of time like watching footage and reading and doing this research.
Yeah, reading. I mean, every Google search you can do of like any variation of like the shoe or articles, and like going down blogs and going as deep as you can until it just doesn't even make sense anymore. And then even like bringing those out, having conversations with Dex, calling him like, hey, do you know this, or like what's going on here? And it would be they're like, yeah, we should do that, or we should explore these things. And then I remember we'd even print things out and be like, okay, I think this is gonna happen. I think this is here, and then we're here, and you're just kind of solving it. You're figuring it all out, and then the interviewees could either agree with that or disagree.
Well, and something that's sort of interesting on a technical front is, like, obviously a lot of the footage from the NBA or TV commercials is like super low fidelity compared to what we have now. And so watching it, it's really pixelated, it's really rough. And there's but also a lot of written content. And I liked how you treated that, like written articles, by sort of animating them and making them a graphic element in the storytelling. And you could, you would like highlight certain words in color, or you would juxtapose, newspaper photos and articles and headlines and stuff, because maybe that was actually what you could find, because there might not have been any kind of decent video footage.
Totally, sometimes it was a solve, and sometimes it was just a creative discussion of like, let's do this to this, because I think this represents the 80s, because even throughout the acts, we go through the different time periods, and like, we would talk about, like, what if we treated it as if it was from this time, and we aged it a little bit on purpose. And other things, it was like, well, this is high res, we're gonna get it. What if we do this with it, or what if we get that? And then other times we'd get lucky and we'd get something from the basement of Madison Square Garden. Someone have to go down and dig through archives, and they'd pull something up for us, and we're just like holding on to this high res of like, let's let this play in its full glory.
Yeah.
Because we have other things that are, we don't know what we can get away with and what we're not doing.
Well, and in the interviews that you shot, those are beautiful, very filmic, like lovely multicam interviews. And they are kind of in stark contrast to just some of the historical footage. How did you pick the different people that you interviewed for this story? Because there's a whole spectrum of people, from NBA officials to sportscasters to musicians to sort of like cultural icons, right? This huge spectrum. How did you decide?
Well, we started with just like a massive list, and we were sort of governed by, which I think kind of applies to the whole film, is like we were governed by this sort of overall philosophy of like the things that we wanted to accomplish that guided us the whole time. And I think one of the things that was important for us was like, we knew we knew going in, though not to the extent and the depth that we ended up discovering and exploring through the film, but like we knew the impact that the shoe had on culture at large, not just basketball, not just sneakers, like across the spectrum. And so if that's true, then we needed voices to be able to like prove that, not even just talk about it, but like show the impact of it. And it was also important that when you were talking to someone like a Chuck D or someone from like culture's history, that you constantly were sort of balancing them out with people from now, as not just as like a gimmick, but literally because the people now that you know, maybe the 16 to 20-year-old kid like really knows, and they don't really know Chuck D unless they're a hip hop file. When they see the impact that Chuck had on whoever it is that they love now, it's suddenly really relevant, and they understand why it's important to know that. And so that, in a lot of ways, like sort of validated some of the older generation of speakers in there, because you're realizing that those guys and ladies influenced all these young faces that you do know and care about. But getting back to your question, how do we pick them? We came up with this massive wish list and went down it, and honestly, like, there wasn't really anybody that ever said no. It was, you know, we had people on there that aren't in the film, some people that we shot and some people that we didn't shoot, but like, it really came down to a time thing. We ran out of, you know, we only wanted to, we had a 3-hour movie at one point, and we're like, nobody wants to watch the 3-hour movie.
Yeah, please don't send any more interviews in this one. We can't take it.
But, so we had to make actually some hard decisions. We cut, you know, some people didn't make it in that we really wanted in. They had amazing interviews and, you know, would have loved to tell their story. But it was the same with interviews. It was like, you know, some people that, you know, we were bummed to not ultimately get, never said no. They were like, you know, everyone was pretty much like, oh, you want to talk about Jordans? Yeah, I'm there. Like, just as long as you can come to me or whatever, you know, whatever the case is, and not always, but, and it was just a matter of time. It was like, how, you know, and we spent a long time filming, but it was, you know, it was, logistics were tough, and, you know, there was only so many hours in the day, and like, we just, certain schedules just didn't match up, and that's what it came
Hard
down
to pin down like Chuck D and Spike Lee and some of those other folks.
Yeah, it was.
A little bit busy.
You can feel that too with some of the interviews, like Jason Sudeikis and some of these people. They just want to talk about shoes, and they just want to talk about, you know, their youth, and they're just having a conversation with you about how they remember. There's nothing scripted. There's an organic excitement behind it that they just want to like, oh, you want to chat about this thing that was really important to me? Here we go. And then those interviews are always just so much more powerful. It's coming from a place of authenticity. And,
completely.
And then that just comes together.
And that's what's so interesting about this story, is there are so many personal perspectives, and there's so much, like, everyone ties their own meaning to this shoe and this time period and what they were doing and what their life was like. And yeah, it's fascinating to get all those different perspectives. So now, how did you all work together during the edit? Were you in the same room? Were you not in the same room? Like, how did you communicate about, you know, the footage that was coming in or the research that you were doing, and how that was going to impact the arc of the story?
It was a mix of all the above. You know, I mean, we were there sometimes. I'd say we were probably not together more often than we were together.
Yeah, it was an unorthodox way of communicating. We would talk a lot in person because we would always be in the same building at a minimum. We would meet up and talk. And then I would go, you know, edit and come up with these ideas, and whether it was alternate versions or whether we just straight up what we talked about doing, those would usually get sent to him. And then, you know, he's running a company and doing things too, where he would get up at, you know, I'd get emails at 4 o'clock in the morning, having watched it, and then I have a whole set of notes, and I get up at, you know, 7 a.m. and I would sit there and go, all right, so this is what we have, and then we would get together, collaborate on what he had wrote, because it wasn't, the thing that's great about working with Dex, it wasn't like, take this, move this here, move this here. It was more of like debate and discussion of like, we want to try and accomplish this, we want to try and accomplish that. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, I don't really know how we're going to do that. And so you go and you start playing with things, and then I could send them all to him and be like, is this what you meant? Or are we trying to do something like this? Because we discovered this, or this person says this, I think this is what you're trying to say. And then we would have a discussion about whether that's working. It's not. It's not like prescription of like, do this, do that. It was, you know, this really collaborative process of
and
how it all comes together.
Did Premiere make that easy for you, as far as like, you could experiment and do a couple different cuts or a few different options, and then, you know, like send those over and then fiddle around either real time or go back and forth?
Totally, because it allows me just to throw everything kind of like in a pot, and that's kind of how we would look at it. Like, we have all these things. I just got, you know, Charles would pull these pieces of footage, and then I have them all, and I'm like, okay, so these are all the pieces that we have. I want to move these around, and I want to do that. And then I want to export this, and then I want to move on to something else. So Charles is going to do that. He can share it over to me. And there's no waiting, and there was no process like that. And that's usually why I default to Adobe, because that's kind of how my brain works. It's like, let me see what I have, because I want to be able to move that around visually and look at everything and do that, and then execute those notes or versions. And like, even when you get the notes, you might have an idea of your own, and like it's great to have a director who's open to the other ideas. Like, here's ABC. We didn't even talk about C, but it kind of just came to me naturally because of what these people say. Because I'm watching these interviews all day, every day, and I know I could probably recite some of them because you need to know the footage that well, so that when the notes do come or the discussions happen, oh, you know what? Who can talk on this? This character. This person can talk about that. And then by the end of the day, you have a whiteboard filled with all these like words and notes, and you look like you're solving a murder mystery of like how things come together.
I'd also add, like while he was doing that, we would have, two assistants really, like sometimes ingesting other, archival footage and stuff that we had to get to in another section, either before or after, whatever the case may be. And then sometimes even like doing like rough cuts of things to tee it up for him. And like, I mean, there's no way we would have gotten 1,800 images that we had, stock images, and the amount of revisions and finding the story was like, it was a very intense process. There's no way we could have done that without like a parallel path working, and not being like, okay, now you're offline, now I'm online, like that whole thing that usually takes place, but not with Premiere, it doesn't.
Yeah, you guys were using team projects at that time, right? Yeah, and so everything was going into the shared team project.
Yeah, which was, I mean, absolutely needed to happen, because the rate we were going, the speed that we were doing that, there was no time to be waiting for anything. So like he was saying, like I could have Charles building something for a totally different scene while I'm doing this, while something else is getting imported, and I don't have to wait for anything like that, because him and I would always be working simultaneously, and it would be, I keep pointing behind because he sat behind me, and I would spin around and be like, hey, watch this, let's see what are we doing, like where are we trying to go, like what did you find? And I would look at, I could just turn around, look at his screen, like, all right, I see what you're doing there, let me take that, send that to me, see if you can build this other piece, and I'm gonna move forward with this. And so there's multiple paths going at a time. And that's really when you're in the editing. That's not, when you're trying to like figure out the story. That's more of like a plugged in thing of like learning and figuring out. This is like when you're cutting, when you're trying to put these pieces together, you're trying to make like edits or the flutters or these other things, and try to, whether you're trying to add flash or be invisible, sometimes we would have to tone back because it moves fast. And so being silent and being slow was actually a huge asset as well. That way when we step on the pedal, you understand what we're doing.
Did you transcode, or did you just ingest footage as it came to you in whatever format it existed in?
If we were going like rogue, if we were just going, I mean, we have a producer, Chad, who would just like try and like wrangle us of like where we were grabbing things from and where we were going, and he would try and keep us like contained, because he's looking for stuff too, and he'd come in our office like, you were looking for this. And we would just start throwing it, unless like we got some error, like this format with some weird thing, because we got it off some web page that doesn't make any sense. Then we would transcode it. For the most part, we're trying to like get things in and move them, or we'd bring them to like a codec where everything was at least the same. So we're not bringing like MP4s, MOVs, and like trying to really test the limits of a Premiere doing these things. But I would sometimes just go rogue, and I'm like, Charles, I'm gonna bring in all kinds of stuff right now because I need to put this together because I have a great idea and I want to see if it's gonna work. And he'd be like, all right. And we have to like backtrack. Where do we get it from? What is this thing even coming from?
Nice. And then I want to talk a little bit, because there's animation in the documentary, there's some graphics, there's still imagery. And so you had a team of graphic designers and animators who there's like some animations of the shoe, and sort of the shoe kind of like explodes and comes back together. How were you working with that team during the edit? Were they handing off like finished animations? Were you going back and forth, and were they tweaking it like during the edit based on notes that were coming from you?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah, much to a lot of people's chagrin, but yeah, it was a back and forth for sure.
Because we had Daniel, who was our director, and they would talk, and then Daniel and I would talk, or all three of us would talk about things, holes or places that we were like, you know what, this didn't really come across. Where's something really creative we can do that would help that. And the thing is, like, we've done animation stuff. We've done full animated spots together, so we knew we had a team that was extremely talented. Like, Charles and I would get things back, and we'd be like, this looks unreal. Like, this actually looks very real. It looks like this is exactly what this is. And they would, you know, he would send them an idea and they would collaborate on that. And sometimes we'd get a rough just to temp it in to see how this pacing would work. And then they would fine tune that and then it would come to us. And then Daniel was also always collaborating of like bringing ideas as well of like, well, we did this in this one part. What if we do something slightly different at the end to reflect whatever change?
And they were working in After Effects, right? So they were just passing comps back and forth from After Effects, and you can pull those into your timeline.
Yeah, because they're also in the same building. We're on the same server, so it would just pop up and we'd version up, and I would see what they were doing.
Nice.
And so we could always have face-to-face conversations about what was happening, what they were doing, what was the purpose. Things. I mean, you're messing with frames at some point, so it's like, hey man, I need 2 more frames, I need 3 more frames, I need this shoot ant float in the air for 6 more frames. And you got to go back, and you're going back and forth, and you're updating, and you're just, all right, put that in, keep it in. But then your project's just growing,
bigger,
because you're like on version 35 of this animation.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, because the visual language was such an important thing, and it was, you know, you had sort of talked about all the different things going on, and it's like that wasn't something that, you know, we set out to do. It wasn't like, hey, we want to make this film that has all these graphics in it. In fact, I remember, you know, the first conversation of, you know, producers saying, so how much graphics do you think would be here? And I'm like, probably none. And cut to like, yeah, it was a different story. But the idea was like, you know, we wanted to explore things until we just found out what worked, and it ended up being that like a lot of things worked, and like that was the idea of like, let's just keep exploring and like come up with new things as we move through it, and that'll be like indicative of time changing in different decades and all that. But it was challenging in that when we started to find the voice, we knew that the volume of graphics and things that we had to do couldn't wait until the end.
Yeah.
So we were doing full up graphics on scenes with assets that were low res and not licensed, and like we knew we had to go back and do it again. So people were like, well, we really need to wait until we have the final. And we're like, we can't wait.
Can't do it.
Yeah. We can't like show it and decide if it's working or not if it's not done. So
yeah.
Because it's not just the edit that's going in multiple ways. Like he's also doing other interviews and he's writing other things, and graphics is going their own direction. So everyone's full force going forward at the same time, and no one's going to slow down. And so you're sometimes you're catching up with one another, and when you're like, you're going that direction, but we're going to go over here. And like so you always need to be collaborating and communicating and open to new ideas. Like we were always like, oh, what if we just did this? We've never talked about this, but what if we do that? And I'm like, great, let's go do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were sort of debating too of like certain things of like, well, we could do it, we could edit it, or we could throw it into After Effects. Like, which one is the better play? You know, like those sliding panels and things like that. And we were constantly kind of going back and forth on it and just finding what worked.
Yeah.
Not just the logic in some cases would dictate that we should do it a certain way, and we'd just be like, no, I don't know, it's working this way, let's do it. You know, let's go for it.
It was like if it was working, we were just going to do it, because I mean, time wasn't on our side, and we were always working towards something. And by the time, you know, we were also excited to see it coming together. Like it's not always just like a grind against time. We were legitimately excited about the project we were making.
Yeah.
And I remember we kind of started in the middle. We had a lot of information for like the middle of Act 2, and we're like, let's cut this and let's give it some style. Let's give it a voice. You know, that was the term we were using of like what makes our documentary different. What are we gonna do? Like what can we throw at this thing? And we didn't have like, oh, because we want to make it like this or we want to make it like that. It was like, let's throw ideas, and it was like, okay, let's try this, let's try that. And when we did that, we did some split screens, we did some flutters, and we're like, oh, there. That's it. Like we got it. Let's move forward with this idea that we can just be throwing different things at it, new things, old or whatever it was. And even the split screen came from, I remember watching Fargo season 2, and they do this like incredible split screen of like, sometimes it's the same place, sometimes a different character, sometimes it's the same character but just a little more close up. And I was like, now that's compelling. That's split screen like I've never seen it. How can we do it for our movie that makes it unique? And then we would share examples of like, well, what if we did this? And what if we do a split screen for MJ, but do this other thing, and like find a way to make it useful for us and not just copy something that had been done before.
I have a question from Will on Facebook. He says, during the edit, did you find yourself wishing for any features that Premiere didn't currently have, but maybe we might have them now? This was a couple years ago that you guys were deep in the edit.
Features that I wish that I had. I mean,
auto edit.
Yeah. nothing that was. I mean, I'm sure at the time there were things I would bang my head against. Like, but it's been a while now. Where you stop forgetting like what was I doing that was driving me mad at the time. But nothing that was like, you know what, this program does this better. I wish that this was happening in mine. That never really happened. I mean, whether I'm using whatever editing software I'm using, they all have their own little quirks and things you have to work around. And nothing during editing of Unbanned at least was like, you know what, I need this. If I had this, I could do X, Y, Z.
Right.
Like that was never the case.
Right. I want to talk about the music
Good
in
question.
the film for a little bit, because the music, it plays a huge role.
Yeah.
Obviously, hip hop was like such a major factor in the mid 80s and with the sort of like cultural zeitgeist of the time. Did you guys do a lot of temping in of music to sort of capture like how you wanted it to feel, and then go back and figure out, okay, well, what can we actually license and what makes sense to put in here?
Yeah, all the above. I mean, it kind of, in talking about, how we got to work together, it's, if I would have, when I set out to like kind of collect the team, what I knew was that we wanted to create something that had this really original voice and like, aiming to kind of do the Michael Jordan of documentaries, if you will. And what does that mean? That sounds cool, but like, how do you pull that off? And I didn't know. I mean, I didn't have the answer of like, oh, it needs to be this and this and this. I think it would have been a mistake actually to do that. And so like getting specifically to the question of like, we knew that it had to have a certain language, and it was definitely like driven by hip hop. And we also knew very early on that like, yes, we needed to like have tracks and license tracks and put them in there, but like, so many hip hop documentaries that I'm actually a fan of, I've always been disappointed in the fact that like they've had some cool tracks drop, and then you cut to the score and it's cinematic score like everything else. And I'm like, well, where's the hip hop? Like how come you lost it? So that was important. And so for Alex, like he was always cutting the music, also much to our music supervisor and EP's chagrin, because they're like, we're timing it too. Now we have to either get that track or recut it, and we did all the above. But it was important that we, had this language that not only like landed on tracks that were right, but then in between tracks, we also we had a beat and it had a rhythm, and it didn't just, suddenly revert to score. And
yeah, it totally worked. Like it was noticeable that you didn't revert to sort of like more traditional scoring, which would have felt weird.
Yeah, very weird. Yeah, the music team was amazing. I mean, they kicked ass, and it was not easy. It's not easy to create a hip hop score. Yeah. It's one thing to pick songs, and that's an art too, but creating the score like that was
because like the thing is like there's not a lot of them out there. It was either hip hop or score. And, like, I'm a huge fan of score, so I had all these scores that we would do, and I would try to find ones that were like unique or had something about them that was different. I mean, strings weren't just going to start coming in, but all these music composers that I listened to on a regular basis were how I was going to build this thing out. And then hip hop would come in, and we even use like Benny Goodman, and these are just things that were like felt right. You're temping them in, and you're cutting to them, or you could swap them out, and it would be all right. But like there aren't just like beat soundtracks that you can just like grab from. And like even if you looked at movies that were about hip hop, like a Straight Outta Compton, that's got a very cinematic, drone, intense score because that's what it is.
Yeah.
But what it does have is arc. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm pulling all these like scores of like the emotional arc of how this is. And then we knew that like this is just to get me to where we're gonna go. But check this out. This is a little bit different. This has this vibe, and these composers are all doing these other things. But that's kind of part of what I love about editing is cutting to these scores that are all from multi-million-dollar movies that would cost like $10 million to make the score. If we would have kept the temp, it would have been
There's like no way you could ever use it.
You're using these amazing composers. So.
But we did have to use, at least on the score front, we had to use a lot of temp score and then have lots of conversations and trial and error on like how to replace it. Like, if it would have just been replacing with more score, easy conversation, right? It needs, change this, change that, make it original. But in this case, it was like, and it needs a beat, and it needs to do these other things, and it's like, like there was no reference. It's just like, there's an emotional impact that's happening, and we can be inspired by that. But then there's this whole element that needs to come into play that like, you didn't have a reference for, so you're just making it up.
Right. Talk a little bit about like the kind of emotional ups and downs and the pacing during the film, because what I appreciated too during the interviews, you would often. One of the interviewees, like Chuck D or Quincy Jones or something, would be saying something, but you might cut to a shot, so the voiceover with a voiceover, but they're looking sort of pensive, right? And you're kind of focused on them, and they're like recollecting their feelings or their experience from that time. And I thought that was a really interesting way to juxtapose that footage together with the voice.
Yeah, that became a tool early on of like either sometimes it was you're covering edits, or sometimes you're doing it because what they're saying is reflective for that state of mind that they're in when you're looking at them not talking. I felt it was more reflective of what they were like saying, and like the look on Chuck D's face of like when he's talking about violence in the 80s and guns and drugs, and you're like, oh, look at him right there. That's what he's thinking about at this moment. So it really helps you to correlate the two, and you don't always need to see someone talking. You're just like, the emotion is just on his face, but you're still getting this information. And then sometimes you're talking about somebody else, and it's kind of cool to see them as if it's a conversation between Phil Knight and Michael Jordan, although they're not in the same room. It lets you know that like conversations happened in the 80s. They were in the same room. These things were happening. And so whether you're split screening or cutting to them not talking, I think it's a huge asset to,
So, it's also like, it's kind of a microcosm for the whole film in a way, because it's like we would be having these conversations, and, can't say how many times I'd be interviewing somebody, and like, their publicist or the rep or their manager or someone that was with them from the team would be there, and we'd be sucked into the conversation. We'd get done, and they'd be like, I thought we were here to talk about a shoe. Like, what are you guys talking about? Like, because we, got so deep, and there was all these metaphors, but like that's kind of the point. It's like, yeah, it's a shoe, but is it a shoe? Is it much more than that?
Yeah.
So that visually that becomes apparent that like, yeah, they might have a look on their face when they're saying something, but like, here's what's actually going on in their head, maybe.
Was there any particular person that you interviewed that you felt like really captured kind of what you were shooting for in the documentary, as far as kind of tying it all together into that the bigger idea or the bigger feeling?
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely a number of people. The conversation that I had with Lena Waithe, which 90% of it's not in the film, it really, punched me in the heart and was like really, said a lot about what the film was really about. Some of it's in, some of it's not, because it sort of goes too far for a shoe doc. But it helped me anchor conversations with Kenya Barris, talking about how and I don't even really actually remember, I don't think this part's in the film, but he told this story about how he grew up in LA, and his family like didn't get together a lot, but one of the rituals that they came together on was watching the Lakers game. And so it was a Lakers household. And so then MJ comes along, and Kenya becomes a Bulls fan, wearing the jerseys and the shoes. And he said it literally was the moment that marked his separation from his father into like manhood. Yeah, it was like that was his defiant like moment of like, I'm gonna be my own man because I'm rolling with Mike,
Wow.
Yeah, and so, but the single thing that like hit me, and I think it clarified it actually for a lot of people around the film, MJ's longtime business partner, St. Portnoy. We were in the middle of an interview, and she tells a story which is in the film, and it's at the very end of the film, about the little boy, who had cancer, and basically, essentially, like kind of held on to life maybe a little bit longer because he had hope, from these shoes and the jerseys. And then when he passed, he was buried in them. When she said that, my whole body like just like tingled up, and she started crying, and I started tearing up, and she got done, and she's like, I'm sorry, maybe that was too much, and I was like, that's the movie. Like, that's the point of the movie. Because she didn't know a whole bunch about it, and MJ was a part of it, and they were sort of like, yeah, we'll do this thing, but didn't really know, the full grasp of it. And, I was trying to explain it to her before we shot, and we didn't have a lot of time. And then when we sat down, I was like, that's the movie.
She just
and then
said
she
it.
was just like, oh man, I get it. I got it. Like,
cool.
Yeah, so it was cool. And I got it. I was kind of like, yeah, that's what this is about.
And that's one of those moments, like you get a phone call, and you're like, we got it. Like, we just got something that's going to change what we're doing. And like so many interviews would have that, they'd have moments that don't make it into the edit that we thought at the time, we were like, oh, got this thing, and we're like, we're going to do that. And then you're like, oh, we're 3 hours long. We can't do that. We can't have it. And but it doesn't take away from that how it impacted us. Like you mentioned Lena Waithe's interview. I remember just sitting there with my headphones, like just kind of being like, wow, like, this is a lot. I can't go this far, but I now know this and I have this tool and I want to look at it through this lens, and I am now, I guess better for it of like knowing this. And that's when she truly inspired me to follow her in her work and what she's doing, because it was like that powerful and like and uncomfortable and honest. And you're like, oh, this is real. This is a real conversation. And so how can we use that for our story? Where can we go? How far can we go? Where limits can we push with each and every one of these characters? Whether they're talking about, the cancer or how it affects their manlyhood or their parents or all these things. Like, where can we push all these little?
Yeah, there's something there's a feeling that you get as a director, and also as a producer or anybody that's on set. When you shoot, it's exhilarating, and you come out of it, and there's a high that comes with it, because it's all, it's like everything happens. Like, you prepare for it, then it all happens. It's game time, and then it's over. But like with these interviews, I literally, like, I walked up from maybe a dozen of them and was literally like, I'm actually a different person a little bit because of it.
Yeah. I mean, the people that you talk to as part of making this movie, it's fantastic. So again, you guys should definitely watch it. There's such a broad spectrum of people who have thoughts and experiences and ideas and history to share about their own perspective. It's really fascinating. I got a couple more questions from Facebook. So, Alex, this one's for you from Jordan. He says, what editors influenced you when cutting together this film?
I remember looking at a lot of like Mac McDonald and like I mentioned, even just Fargo and those things, and then just looking at different movies, honestly, and like looking at different styles of way documentaries were done, and also going at this like feature approach. We would like watch movies and like, oh, how can we do this with this documentary? So not like a specific person of like, I like how he cuts, I want to do that. But we'd find inspiration from movies or television, and like, how do we make this documentary cinematic in that way? Of like, how would they do it? Where would their edits be? And that more of approach. But there was no one individual that was like, yes, that's how that's like gonna go. But there were movies. I had stills from like feature films like on a board right in front of me of like, remember that moment, or remember how they did this, or remember how this actor delivered this line. Like, maybe we can find something like that. Maybe we can find moments like that to put into our movie and make it, take it another level, and not just make it like, this is what happened during these. Like, anybody can go on Wikipedia and find out what happened to these things. Like, how are we going to tell this more cinematic story?
And music videos, we took inspiration from music videos, and then the advertising thing came obviously naturally for both of us. Yeah. So that was a fun. Well, we looked at a lot of stuff and made examples of what not to do. Yeah, we won't talk about that, but like there was definitely a lot of like, we definitely don't want to do that. We love that, but that's not what we want to do.
Interesting.
Like, it wasn't,
yeah.
And like on the weekends, we'd go and we'd watch whatever was, there's certain things, streamings, and we'd be like, that wasn't, we don't want to do that.
Right.
We want to do something else. We were like, and I think that helps. Like, we would do things that we were like, we don't like this. We're going to do something else. I think that's all helpful, and not everything's going to be amazing. We have tons of stuff that is never going to see the light of day, and things that we've deleted and things that we've done. And
the knowing what you don't want is just as important as trying to shoot for something that you do want.
That's just as important of eliminating those things.
Yeah. I have another question. What's your workflow when it comes to documentary? Do you usually watch all the interviews and connect the talking heads first and then form a story? Or, do you switch between like talking head interviews and the other types of footage that you might have?
I watch it all the way through first, and then I'll drop markers on things that I really like. I'll even start cutting it apart as I'm going through, but I always watch it through right away just to see what their story is. And they're usually, it could be an hour. It was on average like an hour or more. But yeah, and then I would work with Charles, and he would break them apart into categories. Whoever says all these things on hip hop, they're going to go into a thing. So I know all my tools for hip hop, and then these are all the moments that happen. And we don't really delete anything, because even those off moments like they were talking about, we ended up using them when they're standing up, when they're getting up, when they're having our interview's over, but then they talk for another 10 minutes, and it's like, I want all of that. We want to look at all of that. Yeah. And then sometimes I would take those things and send them to him as like, your interview's an hour, but here's some stuff that I found that's just really gold, and then like, let's keep this and set it to the side. And then, it's just editors organizing it so that it then becomes quick access. But then you start seeing it so many times where you remember where everything is, and you can kind of just click and start grabbing all these.
We cut transcripts as well, which kind of helped guide a little bit. But that's an interesting process, because you can sort of navigate the point of what you want to say, but then he cuts it together and realizes like, you know, like all the lines I chopped or whatever like don't actually work that well. It works on paper, but it doesn't work. And so there was that.
Yeah, there's that. But like, what's great too is that there's an understanding from his point of view of like, that didn't work, but you can do this, you can do these other things. Of like, and you just kind of, it's not just like, oh, well, I guess we can't do that. It's like we were always problem solving. So if like, so if he's reading through transcripts, because that's easier for him than watching this 1 hour, you know, interview. There was a process of like, oh, he wants to put these things, like let's see what they say, or let's see what somebody else says, and then you can search all these transcripts for all of our characters and all of, you know, the people who we interview to accomplish that goal.
So we're just about out of time, so I want to ask each of you one final question, and that is, did you learn anything surprising during the process of making this film?
What didn't we learn? I don't even know where to begin with that. Like, so many surprising things. I mean, you know, what's the most surprising thing? You know, I didn't think that I guess without giving the movie away for anybody that hasn't seen it, but I'll keep it top line. But like, that whole sort of the inspiration for me in telling the story, I knew that there was something sort of deeper there, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know like what that sort of answer would mean, and the depth of which I think it actually goes to in terms of like the symbolism and the meaning that people ascribe to it, and how deep that runs on really a pretty profound level. Like when you're talking about it changing the relationship with your father or your late father, or like, you know, like those types of things that are like life shit, you know, like big life stuff. I didn't know it was that deep, you know, and like I knew it was going to be deep, but I didn't know it was going to be that deep. And I think, I don't know, for me, when that actually came to be, it all made sense of like, you know, because anytime you make a film, this film in particular, like had so many like sacrifices that came with it, and the impact of like, you know, spending 4 years on it, and all of the things that come with it were pretty big. I mean, like life-changing big for me and for a lot of people around the film. And knowing that that was the point, like I understood why I went through all of that. And so that's, you know, I didn't think that was going to be my journey.
Right, and then it was.
It was.
Yeah. And what about you? Is there anything that was sort of unexpected for you during the process of making the film?
I think it was. I mean, it was the process that I found the most. Like the teamwork that goes behind it, of coming up with these ideas and sharing ideas and challenging one another. That was one of the great things of us challenging one another, but never in like from it was like a debate, but it was a productive like debate of like what we want to do, what can we do, what can't we do, and then, you know, working with, you know, my assistant Charles, and we're coming up with all these things, and it's like it's a group of people, and it's like everyone has to come together and like look at what you're doing and make it better, and then go away and watch documentaries. And like I remember watching Doug Prey, speaking of editors, like doing the Defiant ones. That was like, oh, this is different. This is interesting. How can we do like what's he doing that I'm finding compelling? That's teamwork. And like he's not part of our team, but like when you're watching other things, it's like inspiring you to do other work, to challenge yourself, to see like they did something different. What are we going to do that's different? And that comes from a group of people and a collaboration of people who are watching what you do. And when you're banging up against a wall, you can lean on them to, oh, what if you do this? What if you do that? And because you're going at such a pace, I think it's so crucial to be working with people that you get along with, or, you know, particularly from my experience in the edit suite, to have the vibe and like you're sharing stuff and you're talking about stuff. That was my biggest takeaway, was the people that I was working with.
Yeah, well, maybe you guys can get the band back together for another film. Well, we're out of time, but thank you both so much for coming by.
Right,
it's a fantastic documentary.
Appreciate it.
Highly recommend it. The music is fantastic. It's like, it is 1984, and like the memories of that time period are so visceral. And yeah, I mean, the Air Jordan 1 was such a sort of cultural touchstone. It's cool to watch how the world kind of revolved around that as your centerpiece. So, and congratulations again on the Cannes Award. Very exciting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And best of luck to you on all of the cool stuff that I'm sure you're both working on now.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
Yeah, and thank you guys for
thank
tuning
you
in.
guys.
Thanks.